Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining us today. Look, if you're a focused learner trying to figure out exactly how human psychology operates under extreme pressure, well, you're in the right place. Today we're unpacking the architecture of resilience, strategic preparedness, and human logic. We're going to break down exactly how we, and honestly our leaders, react when the world just suddenly turns upside down. Get ready, because we're looking closely at why our default human settings actually work against us in a crisis and how we can completely rewire our approach.
Okay, let's just dive right into it. The trick is in preparation and planning. Now, I know that sounds super straightforward, right? But it totally shatters this cinematic myth we've all grown up with. You know the one, the idea that great leaders just magically figure things out in the heat of the moment. We all love that image of the brilliant hero making a split-second, life-saving decision right from their gut. But the reality? Our text tells us that the real battle is actually won way before the disaster even begins. Relying on your instincts in the middle of absolute chaos? Yeah, that's literally a recipe for total failure.
Which brings us directly to Section 1, the secret to resilience, preparing for the unknown.
So what exactly do we mean by the unknown? Well, we're talking about massive, terrifying scenarios, recessions, natural calamities, sudden economic disasters, war times, the heavy stuff. And we often kind of fool ourselves into thinking we can just process our emotions and logic our way out of these events as they're happening. But we can't. The text really highlights this huge contrast between the reactive illusion, just thinking and feeling our way through a crisis, and the proactive reality of actually planning for the worst. If you're waiting to react when an economic disaster hits, like a sudden global market crash or a massive supply chain failure, that is exactly where things go off the rails. The sheer scale and speed of these events mean that if you don't already have a plan in place, the situation is going to completely overwhelm your ability to just sit there and think your way out. The trick isn't managing your emotions in the moment, it's preparing long before that moment ever arrives.
So let's look at why that happens. Moving on to Section 2, the anatomy of fear, losing control.
Unknown, unfamiliar, uncertain. What actually happens in the human brain when a sudden crisis hits and we're totally caught off guard? Well, our source gives us an incredibly clear breakdown of why our brains basically betray us at the worst possible time. It turns out human beings reliably run the exact same psychological script when confronted with these three triggers. Seriously, it doesn't matter who you are, how educated you are, or how tough you think you are. When a situation is unknown, unfamiliar, and uncertain, our psychology runs a very specific, highly predictable, and frankly, deeply flawed script.
Let's walk step by step through this sort of slow-motion car crash of our hardwired psychology. Step 1, we face the unknown. Because it's an unfamiliar and uncertain tough time that instantly leads to Step 2, we realize we're losing control. We've lost our grip on reality. And losing that control, that immediately triggers Step 3, immense fear. The text explicitly links this lack of control directly to the creation of sheer, overwhelming panic. It's an automatic, involuntary chain reaction, and it happens in just a fraction of a second.
And that brings us to Section 3, entering survival mode, the self-centered shift.
Once that immense fear takes hold of the brain, it completely overrides our higher-level logic. Our absolute default setting becomes survival mode. You see, survival mode is that simple, immediate reaction where we become completely self-centered in the face of uncertainty and a lack of control. We're no longer making rational, community-minded, long-term plans. No way. We're having an immediate, visceral reaction, and our perspective just shrinks. The source points out that the easiest thing to do is to instantly slip into this survival mode and look out only for number 1. It's an incredibly easy trap we all naturally fall into. When we're terrified and recognize we're utterly out of control, our focus narrows entirely to ourselves. It's a primitive self-preservation mechanism, kind of like hoarding supplies during a shortage. But relying on those primitive instincts is incredibly dangerous when you're trying to navigate a complex modern crisis.
Which leads us right into Section 4, the cost of irrationality, from bad to worse.
Now, this survival mode mentality doesn't just isolate everyday people sitting in their homes. It deeply infects leadership and high-level strategy too. Let's trace the next set of falling dominoes. It starts with Step 1, that survival mode mentality we just talked about. When the folks in charge of navigating a recession or natural calamity are operating out of self-centered fear, the entire population is put at massive risk. In leadership, this mentality directly leads to Step 2, irrationality. Because leaders get so hyper-focused on finding immediate relief from their own fear, they just lose their objective reasoning. And that irrationality,
It basically guarantees step 3, hasty, short-sighted decisions. The source makes it crystal clear. This self-centered mindset inevitably breeds illogical choices that do absolutely zero to solve the root problem, but rather they just compound the crisis. And here's the absolute kicker. This causes immense turmoil to the general population, along with severe long-term damage. These hasty, irrational leadership decisions ultimately cascade down. They don't just fail to fix the economic disaster, they actually cause widespread societal turmoil and inflict significantly more damage in the long run. Just think about impulsive policy changes or knee-jerk financial cuts that cripple recovery efforts for literally years. The flawed reaction to the crisis, driven by unprepared, self-centered fear, ends up outlasting and sometimes being far worse than the initial event itself.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 5, Planning for the Worst, the fail-safe.
So strategic preparation is literally the only way to interrupt this destructive psychological cycle before it even starts. Knowing that facing the unknown leads to a lack of control, which leads to fear, survival mode, irrationality, and hasty decisions, well, we clearly need a fail-safe. Just look at the two paths right in front of us. On side 1, we have the unprepared. Their path is entirely ruled by fear, survival mode, irrationality, hasty decisions, and ultimately long-term societal damage. It's basically a guaranteed chain reaction when humans face the unknown without a plan. But then, look at side 2, the prepared. Their path relies purely on strategic planning for the worst moments in life. By planning ahead, you completely remove the unknown and unfamiliar triggers. Because you have a plan, you retain your sense of control, and that means you bypass the immense fear, the self-centeredness, and the irrationality entirely. It really is a game changer.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question to chew on. Are you preparing for the worst, or are you just waiting to react to it? Think about your own leadership style, your own life, and the systems you rely on every single day. The next unknown is coming, whether it's an economic shift, a natural event, or even a personal calamity. The human logic of survival mode is waiting right there in the wings to take over. Your resilience depends entirely on what you do before that moment arrives. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep learning, keep planning, and stay focused.